13 years old, abandoned by my parents. Then, rescued by my wealthy uncle, living in a mansion like royalty. Sounds perfect, right? Except 15 years later, I wasn't family anymore. I was his maid. This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about how fast life can flip, and the secrets hidden behind luxury. Stick around, because the twists in this journey will make you rethink everything you know about trust and survival. At 28, I found myself bent over, polishing the marble floors of my uncle's mansion, the same floors I once sprinted across as a teenager, laughing like I belonged there. The smell of cleaning chemicals clung to my hands, and every swipe of the mop reminded me of a truth I never thought I'd live: I wasn't family anymore. I was staff. 15 years earlier, I had been rescued from abandonment, given a life of privilege, and treated like a son. But now, I was invisible, moving silently through the same halls that once felt like home. How did I end up here? To understand that, we need to rewind to the night everything changed. 13 years old. That's when the world I knew vanished overnight. My parents didn't sit me down, didn't explain, didn't even leave a note. One day, they were there, and the next, they were gone. I remember standing in the doorway of our small house, clutching a backpack with a few clothes stuffed inside, staring at the silence that had replaced their voices. The fridge was empty, the rent overdue, and the neighbors avoided eye contact like I carried shame on my shoulders. It wasn't just abandonment, it was erasure. That first night alone, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the streetlights outside. Every sound felt louder, every silence heavier. I wondered if I'd ever wake up to someone calling my name again. The walls felt too big, the rooms too empty, and the air too cold. The days that followed blurred together. I ate whatever scraps I could find, sometimes just bread and water. I wore the same clothes over and over, each stain a reminder that no one was there to care. I walked past families in the neighborhood, watching kids my age laugh with their parents, and I felt like I was on the outside of a glass wall, close enough to see, but too far to touch. Psychologists say that sudden parental loss at adolescence can trigger long-term trauma responses, hypervigilance, attachment issues, even identity confusion. And I felt all of it. Every knock on the door made me jump. Every smile from a stranger felt suspicious. I wasn't just abandoned, I was rewired. Looking back, that moment was the fracture that split my life into two halves, before abandonment and after. Before, I was a kid with a family. After, I was a ghost in my own home, waiting for someone to notice I was still there. Just when I thought I'd been completely forgotten, my uncle showed up. I still remember the sound of his car pulling into the driveway, a sleek black Mercedes that looked like it belonged in a movie. He stepped out in a tailored suit, the kind of presence that made neighbors peek through their curtains. Without hesitation, he told me to pack my things. I didn't have much, just that same backpack with a few shirts and a pair of worn-out sneakers. The ride to his mansion felt surreal. Streetlights blurred past the window, and I kept wondering if this was real or if I'd wake up back on that couch. When we arrived, the gates swung open to reveal a world I'd never imagined: marble floors, chandeliers dripping with light, and a staircase that seemed taller than any building I'd ever seen. My uncle walked me through the halls like he was showing me a museum, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I belonged somewhere again. That night, I slept in a bed so soft it felt like clouds. The sheets smelled of lavender, and the silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was comforting. I didn't know it then, but this was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would change everything about who I was and how I saw the world. The first few years in my uncle's mansion felt like stepping into another universe. At 14, I was suddenly wearing crisp uniforms at a private school where teachers actually knew my name. The classrooms were quiet, the hallways polished, and the cafeteria served meals that looked like they belonged in a restaurant. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. At home, life was equally surreal. My uncle's staff handled everything: laundry folded neatly in drawers, dinners served on long tables with silver cutlery, and vacations planned to places I'd only seen on TV. I remember my first trip abroad, walking through airports with a passport in hand, realizing I was no longer the kid who had once slept on a couch wondering if anyone cared. But adjusting wasn't easy. I felt like an outsider in both worlds. At school, classmates saw me as the new rich kid, but I carried the weight of where I came from. At home, I tried to fit into a family that wasn't really mine. Every smile at dinner felt rehearsed, every laugh slightly delayed, as if I was waiting for someone to remind me I didn't belong. Still, I kept pushing forward, telling myself that if I worked hard enough, maybe I could earn my place in this new life. By 17, the mansion had stopped feeling like a dream. Not because the marble floors lost their shine, but because the people inside started showing me where I stood. My cousins never saw me as one of them. At school, they whispered behind my back, calling me the charity case. At home, their stares carried the same message: I didn't belong. My uncle's tone shifted too. The man who once introduced me proudly as his nephew now reminded me, almost casually, that I should be grateful. At dinners, he'd say things like, "Remember, you're lucky to be here." The words were wrapped in a smile, but they cut deeper than any insult. Gratitude wasn't a gift anymore, it was a leash. I started noticing the small ways I was excluded. Family trips where I wasn't invited. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Cousins who flaunted their inheritance while I stayed quiet, pretending not to care. The mansion was still beautiful, but it no longer felt like home, it felt like borrowed space, and I was constantly reminded of the expiration date. One moment sticks with me. My uncle hosted a lavish party, and I stood at the edge of the room, dressed in clothes he had bought me, watching my cousins laugh with guests. A woman asked who I was, and before I could answer, my cousin said, "He's just staying with us for now." Just staying. Those words echoed louder than the music. I wasn't family, I was temporary. Experts call this role ambiguity, when you're technically part of the family, but treated like a guest who overstayed their welcome. And that's exactly how it felt. I was living in a mansion, but every day reminded me that I was one step away from being pushed out. The cracks weren't just appearing, they were widening, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath me. By 20, the mansion didn't feel the same anymore. It wasn't the marble floors or the chandeliers that changed, it was the air. My uncle's business, once booming, started to falter. I'd catch fragments of conversations drifting from his study, words like losses, investors pulling out, and cutbacks. The parties that used to light up the house grew fewer, the laughter at dinners thinner, and the silence heavier. And with that silence came a shift in my place. At first, it was subtle. My uncle asked me to run errands, pick up supplies, drive paperwork across town. I didn't mind, it felt like helping family. But soon, errands turned into chores. I was told to clean up after gatherings, to carry boxes, to fix things around the house. The language changed too. It wasn't, "Could you help me?" anymore, it was, "Do this." I remember one evening vividly. Guests had left after a tense dinner, and my uncle handed me a stack of plates. His voice was calm, almost casual, but the weight of the gesture hit me harder than the porcelain in my hands. My cousins watched from the couch, smirking, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. That night, I realized something: I wasn't being asked to help. I was being assigned. The mansion itself began to feel different. The grand staircase I once admired became something I vacuumed. The dining table I once sat at became something I polished. Every task chipped away at the illusion that I was family. I was no longer the nephew who had been rescued, I was becoming the worker who filled in the gaps. Psychologists say financial stress often makes people more controlling, more rigid. And I saw that firsthand. My uncle's words grew sharper as his business grew weaker. Gratitude wasn't enough anymore, obedience was expected. The safety net I thought I had was unraveling, thread by thread, and I was beginning to see the outline of the role I was being pushed into. By 23, the line between family member and worker had blurred, and then disappeared. What started as errands and occasional chores became routine. I wasn't asked anymore, I was expected. My uncle's words carried no warmth, only instruction. I remember the first time I was told to serve dinner instead of sit at the table. The long dining hall, once a place where I laughed over meals, now felt like a stage where I played a different role. I carried trays, poured drinks, and cleared plates while my cousins chatted as if I wasn't even there. Their eyes didn't meet mine, they looked through me, like I was invisible. The tasks grew heavier. I was asked to polish silverware, scrub floors, and wash linens. Each job chipped away at the illusion that I was family. The mansion's grandeur became a reminder of my new position. The staircase wasn't something I admired anymore, it was something I vacuumed. The chandeliers weren't symbols of wealth, they were fixtures I dusted. And the humiliation wasn't just in the chores, it was in the way people reacted. Guests who once greeted me as the nephew now assumed I was staff. They handed me coats without hesitation, asked me to fetch drinks, and never questioned why I was the one serving. My cousins didn't correct them. My uncle didn't either. That was the moment I realized the shift wasn't temporary. I wasn't helping out during hard times, I was being redefined. My role had changed, and there was no going back. I wasn't family anymore. I was the help. By 26, there was no pretending anymore, I wasn't family, I was staff. My days had a rhythm, but not the kind you look forward to. I woke up early, not to plan my future, but to iron suits that weren't mine. I scrubbed bathrooms I once used, polished silver I once ate from, and dusted chandeliers that had once dazzled me as a guest. The mansion became a workplace. Every room carried a memory of who I used to be, but now those memories were buried under chores. The library where I once studied became a place I vacuumed. The garden where I once played became a space I weeded. Even the kitchen, once a source of comfort, became a station where I washed dishes until my hands stung. The hardest part wasn't the work, it was the invisibility. Guests who once shook my hand now handed me coats without hesitation. My cousins, who once shared jokes at the dinner table, now treated me like background noise. I wasn't introduced anymore. I wasn't acknowledged. I was just there. And yet, in that silence, I learned something about myself. Every mop stroke, every polished surface, every ignored glance, it all forced me to confront who I was without the illusion of wealth. I wasn't the abandoned kid anymore, and I wasn't the privileged nephew either. I was someone surviving in the shadows, carving out resilience in a place that wanted me invisible. By 28, the weight of those years had settled into me like dust that never washed off. I wasn't just scrubbing floors or ironing suits, I was scrubbing away the version of myself I thought I'd become. Every chore carried a memory. The staircase reminded me of the boy who once ran up it with excitement. The dining hall reminded me of the teenager who once sat at the table, dreaming of a future. Now, those same places whispered back at me, "You don't belong." The hardest part wasn't the work, it was the silence. Silence when guests ignored me. Silence when my cousins laughed without including me. Silence when my uncle walked past me without a glance. That silence was louder than any insult. It told me I was invisible. But invisibility has a strange effect. At first, it crushed me. I felt shame, humiliation, even anger. I questioned who I was I still the abandoned kid, or was I now just the maid? But over time, something shifted. In that silence, I found resilience. I realized that my worth couldn't be tied to a mansion, a family name, or even the role I was forced into. Psychologists talk about resilience as the ability to adapt in the face of adversity. And that's what I was learning, day by day. Every mop stroke wasn't just erasing my past, it was carving out strength I didn't know I had. I wasn't defined by abandonment, and I wasn't defined by servitude. I was defined by survival. And survival, I realized, was its own kind of power. Looking back now, I see the mansion differently. It wasn't just a place of privilege or servitude, it was a mirror. It showed me who I was when I had everything, and who I became when I had nothing. And at 28, standing in that same house as a maid, I realized something important: my identity wasn't tied to marble floors or family names. It was tied to how I survived them. Yes, I became my uncle's maid. But that role didn't break me, it built me. It taught me independence, discipline, and resilience. It forced me to stop waiting for someone else to define my worth. I learned that wealth can vanish, family can betray, but strength, the kind you carve out in silence, stays with you. Today, I stand on my own. Not as the abandoned child, not as the privileged nephew, and not as the invisible servant. I stand as myself. And if there's one lesson I carry from those 15 years, it's this: sometimes the cages people put you in are the very places you learn how to fly.